morning. This is the making of the John Batchelor Show. I welcome my colleagues, Bill Roggio, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, and Husain Haqqani, former ambassador from Pakistan to the United States, now a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, to comment as we begin 2026 on the worldwide turmoil. Before we address the turmoil, however, I'd like to say that there is time within anxiety to read books and calm down. What I get from it is that everything I think is fresh has happened many times before. And when I admit that I don't know where we're going, that is commonplace among the historical figures who are now fixed as having been either successful or not. I mention this because I have three books on my desk right now, two of which I've already talked to the authors, and I'll mention them because that's what calms me down. First, there's Rot, which is a history of the Irish famine that brought many, many Irish men and women to the United States after the middle of the 19th century and led to the growth of the United States in a fashion that the British Empire forbid the people of Ireland. The Rot, of course, was the potato famine, which was a phenomenon of seeds that are poisoned with a toxin coming from the New World, that's us, into Ireland. And why it hit the Irish people especially hard was they didn't have another source of food because they were abused by the British Empire. They were regarded as stupid and therefore not worthy of feeding adequately. That's one book behind me. The second book, I had a conversation with the scholar who wrote it over these last days, Carthage, a history of Carthage. The rival to Rome was a merchant genius of Carthaginians on the coast of North Africa. There were three wars between Rome and Carthage, and eventually Carthage was destroyed by Rome as a rival. But it remains a great success in the Mediterranean basin, a merchant success versus the military success of Rome. The new book that I'm talking to the author this weekend is Sword Beach, which is one of the 5 beaches that were identified for Operation Overlord, the successful Second Front in 1944 against the Hitlerites. Sword Beach was one of the 2 assigned to the British Navy and Army. And this is a detailed story of how they came through in preparation, both the parachutists and the glider troops that landed, and the landing on the sea by the commandos, the Green Berets, and by the assault forces of 3rd Division. That's what I'm reading for this weekend. So I begin with you, Hussein. What is your reading to calm you down? Good day to you.
Good day. Actually, I'm reading a book that I bought many years ago. I think it must have come out around that time. This was at least 10 years, but never got to read. And I'm enjoying it because it actually makes us very sensitive to the kind of situation we find ourselves in. The book is called The Sleepwalkers: How Europe Went to War in 1914, and it's by someone called Christopher Clark, and basically it's a like an event by event narrative of what was happening and how everybody was sleepwalking towards a world war without realizing that there was going to be a world war. So small incidents that people didn't think much about, eventually, so he starts with the murder of sort of Alexander I of Serbia, and how that kind of unleashed certain things in Serbia, then in Croatia, the Balkans, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the British, the French, what everybody was doing that was actually sowing the seeds of the disaster that we saw in the form of World War One. And the basic argument is that everybody essentially slept walk into the war, into the great conflict. Everyone with their own little agendas and their own little issues, not realizing that they will all add up to something much bigger, because many things mean more to others than they do to yourself.
And not knowing where they're going is something that we experience all the time. Do you get the sense that we're walking into something we don't know ahead of us, but that we feel the anxiety? How does it make you think about what you've been through?
Well, what I see today is also a world in which there are many actors who don't know where they're going to be tomorrow. I mean, do the Iranians really know what is the outcome of the games that they are playing in the uh, Middle East? Does the United States know what is its long-term game for the world? It's demolishing the order that was built after the Second World War. That's what President Trump is setting out to do. But is he replacing it with something? And if he doesn't replace it with something, will there be consequences? The U.S. Board of Peace, or the not the U.S. Board of Peace, but the Trump Board of Peace, doesn't cut it. So where is everybody headed? I have a feeling that we are back to a sleepwalking stage in which people are just doing what they think is good for them, etc. But it's all going to add up to something that may not necessarily be best for everyone. I am not a young man, so therefore I can afford to kind of look at things as, oops, everybody's walking into disaster, it's moving towards disaster, but I'm not going to be there for the consequences of that disaster, which will probably last for decades, just as the First World War's consequences lasted for decades.
Bill, a good day to you. What is your reading to take you away from the anxiety that we're now again reminding that we live with?
Good day, John, and hello, Hussein. Yeah, to Hussein's point, we are older men, but some of these conflicts can certainly develop in a way that can touch us. This is a linked world. There's with cyber, and we shut down our power systems. God forbid a nuclear war, but that's a whole another topic. I'm currently reading a book, John. This is based on a recommendation by you earlier this year, I believe it was, or was it last year? I can't recall. It was last year. I'm sorry. You recommended a book called "The Greek Generals Speak," and it's about the sort of an after-action report, so to speak, of the Trojan War from the Greek generals. And I like the way this author wrote so much. His name is Philip Parati, that I went and got the Trojan Generals Speak. And it was the Trojan generals griping about their experiences in the Trojan War. And then I found that he wrote another book called Fires in the Sky. And this is basically the Trojan conquest of the Anatolian Peninsula. And it focuses on one general dealing with the neighbors and the problems he has with the Trojan court and his gripes about Prime and his court. And I just find his style fascinating. I'm a big fan of the ancient Greek, Iliad, Odyssey, and I've read everything you can get your hands on. I can't believe I never discovered this on my own. So, John, I'm in your debt for opening up a new horizon here. I wish the author wrote more, but this will be the last one I read from him.
Reminds you of CENTCOM, doesn't it, Bill?
Yes, that was the whole point of you recommending that book to me.
Yeah,
you had mentioned, and I said, basically, there is a lot of griping within CENTCOM, even to this day, about our policy, our strategy, and our tactics in the Middle East. But particularly, we were discussing Afghanistan, and you mentioned that book, and I piqued my interest. I headed on to Amazon and made 3 purchases. Thanks to you, John.
we
Yeah,
began.
I've got a book. I've got a book waiting after this one that I'm going to see is actually updating myself on Thucydides. Everybody talks about Thucydides and the Million Dialogue, etc., and the Peloponnesian War and how the powerful will do what they can and the weak must suffer what they must, etc. But somebody said, and I thought about it, and I said, somebody said, yeah, but the end of it was that the Athenians who said power is all that matters actually lost in the end. And so that made me think, ooh, I need to have a more granular understanding of how thinking of a world in which power is the only factor that you think about. And how does it end? And so it doesn't end well for the Athenians and for all those who think that power is all that matters. So I'm going to reread that. I must have read it 30, 40 years ago, so I think I want to update myself on Thucydides and the Peloponnesian Wars. And that would remind me not just of CENTCOM, but a lot of others as well right now. Because if you think about it, everybody's talking about, oh, it's all about power, it's all about power. Sometimes you can exercise, first of all, you can wield and exercise power, and yet get nowhere.
Gentlemen, let's move from the Bronze Age to what we now know as the Cyber Age, post nuclear event. And I'm going to list quickly the turmoil around the world as we begin 26. Just a moment. We're going to record this for the show. This is the making of the John Batchelor Show. Bill Roggio and Husain Haqqani. Here we go. 5, 4, and thank you, gentlemen. 3, 2, 1. I'm John Batchelor, and I welcome my good colleagues, Bill Roggio, Senior Fellow for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. He keeps the Long War Journal. And Husain Haqqani, former ambassador from Pakistan to the United States, now a Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute. And we begin 2026 with a conversation about global turmoil around the globe. Begin most immediately with what we don't know about a shocking development in the military of the People's Republic of China. The top general and his lieutenants from the military commission have all been removed and charged with corruption. In addition, there's talk that they had too much power. We don't know anything. We don't know why we know what we don't know. There's no transparency here whatsoever, but certainly the second rising power in the world is now headless when it comes to its Pentagon. We have the ongoing turmoil, apparently, in the Middle East about Iran. There is an air fleet that has been assembled by the United States over these last days that completely intimidates everyone in the Middle East. The naval fleet has joined 3 carrier battle groups, in addition to what we know to be F-15s, KC-135s. Everything's in place for a campaign, not a raid like the B-2 of June. No, a campaign, days of targeting and ground activity around around the Islamic Republic of Iran, and especially the leadership in Tehran. The Ukraine war has receded, and it shouldn't, because the casualty rate is enormously overwhelming and is bleeding the future of Europe right now. And yet we don't know where the negotiations are. Sometimes there's talk that Vladimir Putin is accepting envoys from Brussels, from NATO. Sometimes we're told that there's communication, and it goes nowhere. That's the Ukraine war, where there's active war fighting. And then we have Greenland, and there's no way to summarize Greenland other than to say that the administration indicates it wants to buy Greenland, and the EU, supporting Denmark, makes it clear it's not for sale. That's where we are in that turmoil. There are subgroups of these turmoil. Venezuela, for example, unfinished business. Panama, unfinished business. Certainly, the Gaza conflict is now described in science fiction terms as a model of a future smart city on the Mediterranean for rich people. Very odd, but that's the presentation by the Trump administration. That's enough, gentlemen. I come to you. Bill, we've focused a great deal on the jihadists in West Africa, in East Africa, in Syria, certainly the Hezbollah and Gaza. That turmoil is ongoing, almost has become so routine you can step by it. How would you characterize it at the beginning of this year, Bill? Good evening to you.
Yes, good evening, John. Yeah, at the beginning of this year, I would say that it's our policy is a mess. The Western policy is an absolute mess. You have a jihadist safe haven in Afghanistan. We've discussed this in depth for years. Syria, we essentially ceded Syria, not only just ceded it, but handed it over to Al-Qaeda's former head. I have reservations calling him former. He never denounced his oath of allegiance or bayat to Al-Qaeda's top leader. His name is Ahmed al-Shara, and President Trump has visited him and has complimented him. They're on a rampage in Syria now against our former allies, the YPG or the Kurdish, what used to be the Kurdistan Workers Party, which is also a designated terrorist group, but that's a whole other issue. So you have two safe havens for jihadists that are states in Afghanistan and Syria. I'm sorry, Africa is an absolute mess. Um, with the coups and the collapsing governments, the jihadists are on the rampage in Somalia, the Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. I could go on and on, but we've ceded the fight to the jihadists, and we have this idea that well, Al Qaeda terrorists are someone we could work with. It's just the Islamic State that's bad. That seems to be the policy that's come up under the Obama administration and has trickled all the way up to the Trump administration. Um, Biden cedes Afghanistan to the Taliban. Trump cedes Syria to the jihadists. Not sure that we could have stopped the jihadist takeover of Syria, but we certainly didn't have to support it. There's just no will to fight that, what used to be called the war on terror. Our only moves are tactical. We may target a terrorist leader here or there, but we have no desire to actively fight these jihadist groups or go after their key leaders or go after particularly the ideologues, the clerics who are continuing to spout hate over almost 25 years after 9/11.
Thank you, Bill. Mr. Ambassador, the unknowns about China, the unknowns about the air fleet around Iran, that is the whole of the subcontinent, right into the Middle East. So what are you watching about this turmoil that at this time of year?
I am trying to sift between actual ground reality and the political noise. And the reason is because since 2016, we have encountered a situation in which the noise far exceeds the ground reality. So, for example, if aircraft carriers are being moved towards China, and President Trump does intend to, towards Iran, and President Trump does intend to strike Iran, what does he hope to achieve beyond coercion? Because regime change won't take place just through Tomahawk missile strikes and airstrikes. If it is a continuation of the previous action, which is to try and further degrade Iran's nuclear weapons capability and missile capability, then why were we told earlier that that has already been degraded and mission has been accomplished? So are we sleepwalking into a larger conflict again? We start with the airstrikes, but then in the end we say, okay, now we need some more action, and then we need more troops stationed, etc., etc. That's what I'm watching. I don't have an answer, but I'm watching that, and every day I don't get excited by statements because, with all due respect, our president has a relatively low credibility factor when it comes to saying exactly how things are. When he says 100, it can be anything between 100 and 100,000, or it can be only 10. So that's what I'm watching now. On China, again, the more I have drilled, and I've been doing this for the last 24 hours, partly so because I anticipated that you will ask me that question. Look, there has been a process of change at the top levels of the Chinese military that has been going on for the last 2, 3 years. Xi Jinping has been removing commanders. Quite a few of them have been charged with corruption in the past, and some more have been charged now. Somebody has made that into a bigger thing over the last 48 hours into media, suggesting that there is nobody except Xi Jinping who's in charge. There have been rumors of a coup that has been thwarted, etc., etc. All of that will become clear only after a few days because uh, China is opaque at the best of times, and in a situation like this, it's definitely not the best of times. So we'll see. But I don't think that there is something there that is bigger than what was the continuum of a process, which is changes in the military to suit Xi Jinping. In the end, either Xi Jinping will remain in charge or he won't. If he doesn't remain in charge, we'll have to figure out what's coming next. But if he is in charge, then who is the commander of theater X or Y will matter a lot less.
There is a development since we last talked, Mr. Ambassador, that I asked your comment on the fledgling move for a trilateral agreement between Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, with others looking in to join
You
this.
mean Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey?
Yes, Turkey. I'm sorry. Thank you. Although the UAE is looking in on this as well. Something called an Islamic or Sunni NATO. Is there substance to that? Is this a fresh wind?
Look, I was born in 1956. I was 4 years old or 5 years old when the first time I heard the term Muslim NATO. So, I mean, it's a Pakistani dream going back to that far. And some people in Turkey and some people in Saudi Arabia who are Islamists probably pursue the same dream. But is it easy? With three countries with very different agendas, with very different priorities, and with very different enemies. I don't think any Pakistani thinks of the Greeks as an enemy, whereas I doubt if any Turk thinks of the Indians as an enemy. Now, for Pakistan, India is the enemy. For Turkey, Greece is the enemy. Similarly, the Saudis, for them, internal stability is far more important than looking at the Greeks or the Indians as an enemy. So, unless you have a shared enemy, and a shared goal, you don't come together. Right now, all that is happening is that Turkey needs to project power, Saudi Arabia needs to reassure its people that it can find security partners, and Pakistan needs money to be able to pay for its security and its military capability. So it's a good thing to talk about for all of them. I doubt this is going to easily become a Muslim NATO.
And right now, because there is talk of a trilateral agreement, I mentioned you. I accidentally left out Turkey. That's the important one. Turkey is the perception that Turkey's growing in power because of the deterioration in Iran. Is that generally the understanding?
Well, some people think that. The fact remains that Turkey has always had a large military, as has Pakistan. Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, Iran, and Indonesia are the five countries that have the largest armies in the Muslim world. But look, Turkey is a strong country on the crossroads of Europe and Asia with a foot in NATO. It will have to think very carefully if it is going to position itself as some kind of a. I mean, it wants to be. Erdogan says that, but the moment it starts looking more towards the Middle East, first of all, there will be Arab concerns because we must remember that the Turkish Ottomans were the occupying and colonizing power in the Middle East for a long time and were overthrown by the people in the Arab revolt. So they're not going to easily accept Turkey as the hegemon again. Israel is not going to like Turkey, and Turkey might lose the advantages of belonging to NATO. So they may talk a big game, but will they actually exercise that power beyond their immediate neighborhood? And that neighborhood includes Syria, where they have very successfully installed a former Al Qaeda leader as their ally and partner. But the game there is far from over as well. So I think a lot more sea foam, as the Chinese say, than substance.
I'm speaking with Husain Haqqani, former ambassador from Pakistan to the United States, now at the Hudson, and Bill Roggio of the FDD. When we come back, I've asked Bill to comment on the very, very important but unseen in general deterioration of governance in Africa. This is very carefully a beginning of the 2026 year with turmoil around the globe. We're beginning the year. There's much we do not know, but we're making lists of what we're watching. I'm John Batchelor. I'm John Batchelor with my two colleagues, Bill Roggio of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy and Ambassador Husain Haqqani, former ambassador from Pakistan to the United States. He's now a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. We're looking at the beginning of 2026 with turmoil around the world. And Bill, you were good to mention Africa as a combat theater that is given very little attention from the news reports online or in the papers. You have to look very hard to have a summary of the scale of the difficulty. Thanks to you and your colleague Caleb Weiss, I've been introduced to some of the troubles. And you mentioned that the jihadists are in control. There's also the Russian presence in many of these same states. So your measure of Africa at the beginning of the year, is AFRICOM, the U.S. approach to Africa, is that comprehensive? Is NATO looking at Africa? Is the African Union capable of the scale of the threat? What is who is watching the growth of the villains?
Yeah, John, the U.S. seems to have settled on a military solution to Africa with AFRICOM. They are at the lead of the effort to fight jihadism and stabilize states. But Africa is completely under-resourced here in the United States. It's not a top priority. And that is how countries like Russia and China and even countries like Iran have moved in and filled the vacuum with economic support, diplomatic support. Look, as far as Europe has been largely sidelined in Africa. The French have been kicked out of Niger and Mali, the former colonies. That the reality is that French, with U.S. support, military aid to fight the groups like the Al Qaeda and the Islamic State fighting there, was a stalemate at best. They were slowly losing. These countries had coups, ejected the French and the Americans. We lost our bases in Niger. These were key to maintain surveillance. There may have actually been strikes that were launched from here. I can't confirm that. But Niger, being a central country in North and Central Africa, these were important bases that we invested hundreds of millions of dollars in, and we insulted the junta there, and we got kicked out for it. Now you have jihadists spreading to countries like Chad, and obviously Nigeria has always been a mess. Our efforts there are.
We've got about a minute, Bill.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sure. And in Nigeria, we're worrying about Christian persecution more than a jihadist threat. And you have countries like Burkina Faso and Benin and Togo, where jihadists have safe haven there. If you would have asked me, after days after 9/11, that we'd have to be checking passports for places like Ghana or Benin to worry about jihadists, I would have laughed, but it's no longer a laughing matter, John.
Mr. Ambassador, we've got 30 seconds. Is Africa a concern in the subcontinent, or is it another bridge too far?
It's definitely a concern in India and in the Middle East. We must remember the 4 countries that are now investing most in India are 3 Middle Eastern countries: Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, and India. They are trying to counter China's influence in that continent, considering that the United States has not been doing that for several years.
I thank Husain Haqqani and Bill Roggio for the concerns that we can list at the beginning of 2026. I'm John Batchelor. Thank you, gentlemen. That was a disturbing summary. Yes.
As always.
I think I am actually inclined to agree with the who's she, Kalas, the foreign affairs spokesperson or whatever she is of the EU. When she was asked, what do you think we should all be doing about the changing situation of the world? She said, those who drink should drink more wine, and those who don't should start drinking.
A good EU pitch. Buy our wine. Husain, thank you very much for helping today. I look forward to next Monday.
Absolutely.
We'll have more anxiety. Thank you.
Yeah. Some of it is unreal. All the best. Take care.
Bye.
Take care.
Bill, we're waiting for our contact in Guam, Cleo Paskal, your
She's in Guam, huh? I haven't talked to Cleo in a while.
She's traveling after the Honolulu Defense Forum where they identified the challenges for the year, chiefly to do with the People's Republic of China, which is very prominent in all of the sovereignties and colonies, including those that are in the possession of the United States, using soft power, influence peddling, the well-known whole of society offensive. There's a casino that was built in Saipan, an island that is part of the Northern Marianas, that is the responsibility of the United States. It's U.S. territory.
Mm-hmm.
The Chinese built a casino there. It's now in ruins, but ready to be revived, and made it possible for money laundering coming from the mainland. This is over many years. Cleo's in Guam, which is U.S. That's the naval base. I mean, that's but all around are Chinese agents looking for advantage.
Yeah.
So when Cleo, here she is, coming from Guam, and it's wonderful to welcome Ms. Paskal. A very good day to you. Bill and I were just reflecting on your travels from the Honolulu Defense Forum to Guam via Palau. Do I have that right, Cleo? A very good evening to you.
Good evening. Yeah, that's right. And I am on to YAP tomorrow.
YAP is your latest acquisition. Explain that YAP is more than a line in a cartoon. What is the issue at YAP? I believe it's an airfield, but there might be more to it now.
So YAP is a state in the Federated States of Micronesia. So it's a big chunk of the Central Pacific, and it's where places like in Federated States of Micronesia is where Truk Lagoon is, where Ulithi Atoll is. These are very major World War II sites. And the state of Yap has the main island of Yap. And on the main island of Yap, Secretary Hegseth has announced about $2 billion worth of U.S. infrastructure, including redoing the airfield and the port. But meanwhile, further down the chain, in another part of the state of Yap, the Chinese are rebuilding an old Imperial Japanese runway. That and the handover ceremony, I hear, is now scheduled for the 9th of February.
9th of February to hand over from
the Chinese state-owned company to the president of the Federated States of Micronesia, who's a good friend of China. And this drives me a little bit crazy because, as you know, John, because we covered it, I was there for the groundbreaking. The U.S. government knows that a Chinese state-owned company is about to hand over an airfield to a country that is supposed to be one of the closest allies of the U.S., and there will be no U.S. representatives on the ground. No Peace Corps, none of the military that are in nearby Yap, none of the State Department officials. There's going to be no, as it now stands, no presence to show the locals that the U.S. cares, that presence is deterrence, as we keep hearing, and no one to show the Chinese that the U.S. is watching and considers it important. So this is an indication of some of what's going on in the region. Big focus on the kinetic buildup, not as much on the political warfare front, where the wins are easy, low cost, and are very important for showing the locals that the U.S. really cares. And so they should care about the U.S.
We're going to begin our record because we've got a lot of territory to cover. What is important here is that there's a new document from the Trump administration describing its understanding of the challenge of the Indo-Pacific, Oceania, in 2026 and beyond. However, that document already is in question because of what Cleo just gave us as evidence that we're not showing up. And presence is participation need to be present. So we'll begin just a moment. This is that vast ocean known as the Pacific, but attach that to the vast ocean that's known as India. All of that is at risk, all of it, including parts that are said to be the territory of the United States. I've learned this from Cleo over quite some time. So Bill and I were about to go to the Pacific Islands. We'll start with Honolulu because we know where that is. We're going to go to Palau, which is a critical juncture in the supply chain that would need to be protected in the event of conflict in Taiwan or the Philippines, a highway, an air highway and naval highway from the Hawaiian Islands to Japan and the Philippines and Taiwan, right through Palau. And then we'll go to Guam, where Cleo is now, and speak of the Chinese plans for all of these islands, including those islands that are territory of the United States, U.S. citizens. China has plans. They're very aggressive. So just here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2. Thanks, Cleo. Making of the John Batchelor Show in the Pacific. 1. I'm John Batchelor. Bill Roggio, my colleague and co-host from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. And we're going very far away to the island of Guam, a naval and military base for the United States government, U.S. territory, in the Pacific, to speak with Cleo Paskal of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, one of Bill's colleagues, who's been traveling from the Hawaiian Islands to Palau on to Guam. We begin in the Hawaiian Islands because of the Honolulu Defense Forum. And I mention that because there's a new document from the Trump administration that identifies its challenges for 2026 and its registration that China's on the offensive. And in the event of conflict, kinetic conflict with China, all of these islands are going to be critical and part of the battle zone. Cleo, a very good day to you. Thank you for joining us. Whatever time of week, Cleo is always ready to comment on these islands to give them the proper due in Washington. The Honolulu Defense Forum, what did you learn there? And how does that connect to the new defense document from the Trump administration, understanding there is a threat in the Pacific? Good day to you, Cleo.
Good day. So the Honolulu Defense Forum had a bit of a different tone this year than previous ones, in that there was a concerted effort to include investment into the method of outreach into the region. So understanding that critical infrastructure, critical minerals are components of defense. So you had people there, for example, like Kyle Bass, who are involved in rethinking how to integrate some of the economic levers into defense approaches to the region. And that meant that there were breakout sessions on things like energy, connectivity. It was quite interesting, and it was starts to get at this issue of, the Chinese Communist Party obviously looks at kinetic warfare. You can see it in their naval buildup, but they're also using economic leverage to the nth degree in order to impose their way of doing things across the region. So I think this was what we were seeing, was an attempt to start to get at that. What was in the defense strategy is a different matter.
Bill, you have a question for Cleo.
Cleo, the soft power that the Chinese have wielded throughout the Pacific, how is it possible that the United States allows this to happen in U.S. territories? Is this because we have been negligent, unaware of the Chinese efforts, or are we trying to allow these local governments local autonomy? I've never understood the reason that the Chinese were permitted to do this in U.S. territories.
As many of the American citizens who live in U.S. territories agree with you. If you're talking about, for example, so I'm in Guam, and just to situate you, I'm about a little over 2,000 miles from Hong Kong, about 2,000 miles east of Hong Kong, and about 3 times or 2 or 3 times that west of Honolulu. This is how far the U.S. stretches, and that's why we hear a lot about the term homeland, and hemispheric defense, Western hemispheric defense. Guam isn't in the Western hemisphere, but it is part of the homeland. So it should be in that first bucket of priorities. And just north of here, 60 miles from the land in Guam, you get the southernmost island of the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, which is Rota. The Commonwealth of Northern Marianas is in different U.S. territory, a whole series of islands that includes Saipan and Tinian, storied names from World War II history. And there was, right now, at this very moment, Chinese citizens can come into the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas without a visa. That's it. There's no, without a visa, they can get on a plane in Shanghai and step off the plane onto U.S. soil without a visa. Now, they're not supposed to leave the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, but at least in the hundreds, it's been documented that they're illegally taking the boat the 60 miles to Guam, where they've been found wandering around the U.S. military bases. In the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, the woman that runs the Bureau of Motor Vehicles was convicted of selling U.S. driver's licenses to Chinese. Chinese citizens have been involved in a whole range of criminal activity. I mean, this is a territory with a population of under about 50,000 people. The casino that the Chinese set up there in 2014, 2015, in the first 3 months ran about $5.3 billion in 3 months through less than 20 tables. That casino has now gone bankrupt, but the new entity that's bought its assets is linked to the old company, as per Washington Post reporting, and presents as Japanese, but it is also Chinese. Why is that allowed? Who knows? The locals will point to things like on the board of that casino was James Woolsey, the former director of the CIA. One of the advisors was Louis Freeh, who is director of the FBI. They're as perplexed as anybody else. They were against the casino. The population was against the casino, voted against it multiple times. Their leadership went on visits to Macau and Hong Kong and came back pro-casino and made sure that it went through. And one of the people from the legislature of the Marianas, who helped the legislation go through, is now the politically appointed Deputy Assistant Secretary for Interior, who represents the U.S. government in negotiations with the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, Guam, Palau, Federated States of Micronesia, and Marshall Islands. So they are as confused as you are, Bill, about why this continues to go on, because it's pretty in your face.
Cleo, I turn to the unclassified national defense strategy recently distributed by the Trump administration, in which the Pacific Oceania is mentioned, and that is a positive step. What more do we need to know from the Trump administration to understand that they're looking at a comprehensive approach to these, let's call them oversights of the last several administrations?
So it's interesting. The national defense strategy wasn't very encouraging, but what I'm seeing on the ground is more so. So in Palau, for example, there were a series of agreements that were signed between the U.S. government and the government of Palau. And Palau is a country that recognizes Taiwan in just before Christmas. And those agreements, the headline, if you've heard of them, is that Palau agrees to take up to 75 deportees from the U.S. But the rest of the package is actually what was more important from the perspective we're talking about, because the U.S. committed to sending law enforcement personnel, including cyber expert, to help them protect against Chinese transnational crime and corruption. And that's the sort of cross-sectoral defense that you really need. You need to block the Chinese illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive activities, as the Filipinos put it, and at the same time build up alternative economic alternatives and alliances. And you can see that happening in Palau. But the issue with the national defense strategy is that the language of it, it speaks about strong denial defense along the first island chain. But if you don't get your head around the whole middle of the Pacific and the importance of Guam and the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, you can't get to the first island chain. I've mentioned how far it is. It's like over 7 hour flight from Honolulu to Guam. That's a lot of ocean. And the Chinese are very active on the ground. trying to make it extremely difficult for the US to get across the center of the Pacific safely, which is exactly what the Japanese did in the 1920s, 1930s. This whole area, this whole center of the Pacific, Palau, Federated States of Micronesia, Marshall Islands, was all part of the Japanese empire, Japanese mandate from 1914 until 100,000 Americans died during World War II. And because of that, because of those sacrifices, the US made an arrangement with those countries as they became independent that the US would have strategic denial and very unique basing rights and other arrangements. But that is a focus on the kinetic that doesn't capture the way the Chinese are moving through political warfare in order to undermine the US position. And we can see that on the ground all over the place. In YAP, the US is talking about putting in $2 billion worth of infrastructure on one island. Meanwhile, the Chinese are rebuilding an imperial Japanese runway on another with no American presence on the ground on that island at all.
Reminds you of the scattershot in Africa, doesn't it, Bill?
Yeah, absolutely. It's we just seem wayward. This is, as Cleo notes very well, it's a strategic area that we just seem to want to cede our influence and our strength.
You have a question for Cleo?
I do. Yeah, Cleo. The what's the policy towards India? This national defense strategy. It says, quote, "We will deter China in the Indo-Pacific through strength, not confrontation," end quote. Yet there is not a single mention of India in this document. Is India still considered to be a strategic partner and ally in the region against China?
Well, that's a good question. It was explicitly mentioned in that context in the national security strategy, but that wasn't picked up in the national defense strategy, which is supposed to support the national security strategy. So I don't know. Ambassador Sergio Gore has now presented his credentials in Delhi, and from what I understand, he's going to be a very active ambassador, and of course, he was head of a very important presidential unit, which means that he has very close access to the president himself. So the fact that somebody who could have picked anywhere in the world to be ambassador chose to be posted to India, and it's somebody who potentially has the president's ear, is an interesting development, a good sign if you are concerned about the direction of U.S.-India relations. And I'm just waiting to see how that develops, because he really has just almost in the last few days presented his papers. And so I think we're going to see, as he finds his footing, what the U.S. strategy is going to be involving the kind of direct bilateral relationship. So yes, as per the national security strategy, a lot about India being important. National defense strategy, there was very little on what it means. Like, again, I don't know how you get to the first island chain if you can't get across the center of the Pacific. And I don't know how you can talk about the homeland without talking about Guam and the Marianas. And the way that things were worded, like we can, strike from the homeland, implies that they weren't thinking about Guam being the homeland, because of course you can strike from Guam, but the way that the stuff was phrased seemed to imply that they were thinking about strikes from mainland USA. So I don't know. We'll see.
We're going from the Pacific Ocean to a very large story in the Indian Ocean, the Chagos Islands, when we come back. Bill Roggio and Cleo Paskal, the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. I'm John Batchelor. I'm John Batchelor with Bill Roggio, my colleague and co-host of the FDD, and his colleague in the FDD, Cleo Paskal, who is in Guam, the Pacific Islands, but Cleo's been watching the story of the Chagos Islands. This is a group of islands in the dead center of the Indian Ocean. And one island in particular, Diego Garcia, is a massive air base the U.S. uses to project power into the Middle East. Right now, for example, the KC-135 is based out of Diego Garcia. In the potential of conflict over Tehran for some days are going to be vital to maintaining the air campaign. Diego Garcia is part of the Chagos Islands. It is the intention of the government in London to hand the governance of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. There is no history of this. Mauritius was part of the British Empire, conquered by gunboats in the 18th and 19th century. So is Diego Garcia, so are the Chagos. But when we last spoke of this story, Cleo, it was a done deal. The House of Lords was going to vote and it was going to go through. But there's been a stop order. The President of the United States spoke negatively of this matter. And right now there's a holdup in Parliament, although it might be procedural again. I can't tell. What is your measure of the Chagos conflict right now? Are people reconsidering this handover to Mauritius?
It seems like, well, so there had always been opposition within the UK, but it seems like Washington has finally woken up to how insane the deal is, thanks to the President Trump statement about its stupidity, and in all capital letters. And another thing that's come up recently is that the US and the UK actually signed an agreement in 1966 that said that sovereignty over the region, over the Chagos archipelago, would stay British for 50 plus 20 years, which means that there is an existing agreement between the US and the UK that the archipelago stays British until 2036. So now there's this kind of fundamental legal question about whether the UK had the right to enter into this agreement with Mauritius in the first place. And it casts a new pall over the actions on the UK side, because they must have known about this agreement, this pre-existing agreement with the US, and they may have they either ignored it or obfuscated it or something, but it shows an ill intent that makes one reevaluate some of the other elements of what's been going on here. Because again, for example, Mauritius has signed the Pelindaba Treaty, which is a Pan-African nuclear-free zone treaty. And so as soon as sovereignty is transferred, the U.S. policy is not to confirm or deny if there are nuclear weapons anywhere. And so immediately it will open up the U.S. to, at the very least, narrative warfare, if not legal proceedings, over its ability to freely use the base in the way that it wants. And the U.S., was assured by the UK, oh, it's not a big deal, but it actually is a big deal. And similarly, the agreement requires the UK to pay billions of pounds to the Mauritians over 99 years for the lease. But the agreement stipulates that if the UK misses one payment, Mauritius can terminate the lease. So there are all of these time bombs in the agreement that seem now, especially in light of this 1966 treaty, not to be mere oversights or poor drafting, but time bombs designed to make it untenable or difficult for the U.S. to legally stay in Diego Garcia.
And behind the curtain is the People's Republic of China. Bill, you will not be surprised to learn that Mauritius is heavily influenced by money coming from Beijing. Is that a fair generality, Cleo?
Yes, and it's really at its most basic level. I mean, to the point where there are gentlemen's clubs all over with very good video capabilities, things like that. I mean, it's this is a pretty wired and tied up country, Mauritius, in terms of its relationship with China, and Prime Minister Starmer is on his way to China this week, and he already has one gift to give them, which is the China Mega Embassy in London, which is situated close to some critical underground cables. And I suspect, seems like he may have been looking forward to laying yet another present at the feet of the emperor, which would be, Diego Garcia. So I mean, it's really that bad This is a Five Eyes partner who seemed ready to jeopardize U.S. positioning in a unique base that ranges the Middle East and Africa, the entrance into the Indian Ocean from the Pacific Ocean, and it's very difficult to see why, as the president said. No reason whatsoever! Exclamation mark, capital letters.
Cleo Paskal, the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. She's in Guam, which is a naval and military base anchoring the defense of the Pacific from the threat of the mainland. That's East Asia. That's the PRC. Bill Roggio of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. I'm John Batchelor. It worked, Cleo. It worked. It worked.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill, the ocean.
Bill, we add Diego Garcia detail to the quandary you raised earlier. Same story. What are they thinking?
Yeah. And Cleo, so that agreement, that means that there's what, like 15 years left on the lease, or am I reading that wrong?
So there's the original agreement with the UK.
So 50
There's
and
10
20?
years left.
Yeah, 10. Okay. Yeah, I was
10
trying
years
to
left.
map it.
But it says, the agreement sort of says, the assumption is that they would be indefinitely, like, I think what happened, from speaking to other people, is the US said at the time in the 60s, we'll put in the money for the base, but we don't want you to sell it out from under us. And so they, or transfer it to us. And the Brits were like, no, trust us. We're not going to transfer it to you, but we promise you can stay. Perfidious Albion. Yeah. Good to see you, Bill. It's been a while.
You as well, Cleo. It's been too long.
Yeah.
Well, Cleo is my eyes and ears on this vast ocean, Bill. Has been for several years.
Yeah, she's following it closely. Going there, too. I love it.
Yeah. I've got, I'm trying to shame the U.S. into sending somebody to that runway opening. I was there for the groundbreaking, and it took like 5 days sleeping on the open deck of a tramp steamer. And I don't want to do it again, but I will, because you can't cede ground. You can't just let them do what they want.
I mean, like with Diego Garcia, I've always been like, what's our plan B? Are we even calculating the next?
No plan B.
We're gonna lose it. You know that.
Don't have to.
Don't have to, but I get the feeling we will. If all the Brits got to do is miss a payment.
Well, so the deal isn't signed yet. So we're hoping to kill the deal, right? With Mauritius. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Oh, that was part of the new deal if they missed the payment.
Yeah.
Okay. I apologize. I'm not very astute on this.
But that's good for me to know, because that means I didn't explain it well. So I got to explain it better.
Also, no, it's okay. I may have misheard. There's a lot to process. So.
Bill, we're going to follow Cleo very carefully. Where are you next, Cleo? What's the next part? You're traveling.
Yap. I go to Yap tomorrow.
After Yap.
DC.
Okay.
So the real wild jungles and dangerous place.
You will be in Yap until what day?
Until it depends on whether I go out for the groundbreaking.
Okay.
So
let me know.
at least till the end of the month.
If you're on Yap, I'd like to talk to you there.
Okay.
To make the point for Washington. Bill and Cleo, I thank you very much. This has been a live broadcast. Broadcast is the wrong word. A live cast of the making of the John Batchelor Show with Cleo Paskal in Guam and Bill Roggio in the East Coast of the United States, where we're buried under snow and there's more coming. We're sending Bill to the slopes right now. And I'm turning to the New World Report, an update on Venezuela, an update on Brazil, and attention to Panama. That's unfinished business after Greenland, because the Chinese are still holding on to the Hutchinson ports on either side of the Panama Canal. What was the Biden administration thinking, Bill? They were snoring.
Yeah.
Wow. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Cleo.
Thanks, John. Cleo, great to see you.
You too.
Thank
Okay,
everybody for listening in. We'll be back in 23 hours.
good night.